The first order of business is approval of the agenda as circulated. It has one action item and then a session of FY26 budget development. Do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda as circulated?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. First order of business is an action item, which is introduction of ordinance number 2025-1, which is an amendment, the mid-year amendment to the fiscal year 2025 budget. And you've each had a draft ordinance circulated. To get this on the table for discussion, I will entertain a motion to introduce ordinance number 2025-1.
I move that we introduce ordinance R2025-1.
Second?
I'll second.
Very well. It's on the table for discussion. Barbara, do you want to, you've
Sure.
prepared a very
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll just be
thorough
very brief.
summary, so if you can summarize the summary.
Sure. I think as we've talked about before, I'll just kind of start with the revenues. The carryover from last year was more than what was budgeted by $136,455. Based on the January real property tax receipts, which we were just notified of, so it didn't show up in the financial report, I'm estimating that we'll come in $20,000 over budget in real property taxes. From state of Maryland, as you all know, we had two grants. One was $300,000 for Town Hall, and then $250,000 for Yendel. Suffice to say, I was probably a little overly optimistic in terms of the timing of those projects, and both of these grants basically are done on a reimbursement basis. So we'll just have to kind of try to align the projects when they will actually be eligible for reimbursement in the 26 budget. From Montgomery County, once again, this will sound familiar to you, we did come in higher than anticipated on municipal tax duplication payments due to the efforts of County Councilmember Kate Stewart, who advocated on our behalf for a park maintenance payment, which we have been turned down twice, 2 years in a row, so very grateful to Kate for doing that. Investment revenues are trending higher by about $20,000, and then on Penn Place rents, as you know, we signed a lease with Black Market after the start of the fiscal year that was retroactive back to July 1st. That will bring in approximately an additional $52,000. In addition, at your last meeting, you authorized me to negotiate a lease for the small office space on the third floor. Are there any questions?
What's the status of that?
It should be signed soon. I assumed it would have started today. I think the tenant is lagging a little bit behind, but it should be
So
signed.
what's the monthly rent about?
It's $1,000 a month.
Okay.
Who's the tenant?
It's actually one of our vendors. It's our IT consultant. He has two businesses. One is his kind of private sector clients, and the other is his municipal clients. So he was looking for an office, I guess, to better serve his municipal clients. So,
Sounds good.
yeah, he should certainly be reliable. Since
So have you put that money in this budget?
Yes,
That
I did.
revenue? Okay.
Yes, I did. If there's no questions about revenue, the only expense, operating expense item is a request for funding in the amount of $19,000 to complete the town office renovation. As most of you likely recall, we ran into some significant issues in permitting that ended up costing us almost $24,000, which really ate into the budget that we had to buy some furnishings. Basically, that almost $24,000 was spent primarily on architectural and engineering drawings that the Department of Permitting Services required. We also had to install some fire equipment, and all of the delays basically also resulted in some additional cost on the part of our general contractor for filing everything. So if approved, the requested $19,000 would be used to kind of finish up some of the furnishings for the office space, some area rugs for sound absorption, kind of the aesthetics, as well as the floor protection. As you know, we had the floors redone as part of the project. We also wanted to get some acoustic panels for the conference room and then just some decorative items such as wall art to sort of finish off the space.
Yeah, I just was over there, and whoever put the couch and the coffee table in that little atrium, it looks great.
That was
so
Lumber
thank
and
you.
Light, yeah,
Yeah.
they did a nice job. So basically, because of it's kind of a mixture of additional revenues in some cases, backing out the grant revenue, but all of these combined would result in a reduction in the total to capital transfer by $306,066. In terms of the capital budget, it was a little bit like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole on the ARPA stuff, because I have to basically balance it to the dollar in terms of what I turn into the Treasury Department. And so I was trying to see which projects sort of fit and which ones kind of needed to be handled differently.
Three-dimensional chess.
It was a little bit. I sat there and like, okay, what needs to be moved and where? So one of the items, and within the Treasury Department, I have the ability to basically define what the project is, which comes in helpful. So the original plan was to basically purchase the pickup truck, which was just delivered last week, and then we have some outfitting that we do with a separate vendor. To make the math work, basically the truck purchase is an ARPA-funded purchase, and then the outfitting of the truck would basically need to be charged to equipment, which currently has a zero balance. So that's the $4,075 you see for capital account 25.0. As I mentioned, basically this due to timing issues, $300,000 would be backed out for the state grant. Similarly, town hall funding would be reduced by $300,000. That will obviously be restored at the appropriate time. Yendel is not a dollar for dollar because of the additional revenues we received. It's only being reduced by $10,141 to make the math work. A couple things that I just wanted to call to your attention. So initially, you may recall that there was roughly $3,300 for Clark Azar charges related to the repair of the masonry wall at the pool property. That was all charged to ARPA. A portion of that has been journal entered to account 32.6, just once again to make the math work for ARPA Treasury reporting purposes. The maintenance shed rehabilitation was identified as a possible ARPA-funded project. We haven't started that project yet, but it will be booked to account number 27.3, which is facilities other maintenance.
Do you have a schedule for that? Like when is the painting and all, when is that?
We're waiting just for the weather. There's no, yeah, we did check to see about the historic area work permit. Initially, I was told by one staffer that we needed to file. After it got reviewed, basically they indicated we don't need a historic area work permit. So got an application, but nowhere to go. So I think it should be starting soon. I think Danny was just waiting for the weather to be consistently good. But we do have existing funding in 27.3 to cover the contract cost, which is $11,550. Similarly, to kind of make the math work for the ARPA part of it, you may recall there's two components to our contract with traffic systems. One was just sort of the base contract cost, which was, purchasing the lampposts and the luminaires and then having them installed and associated wiring. And then there was sort of an unknown component for getting power to the poles, which is all going to be through PEPCO. That PEPCO piece will basically be charged to 28.1, which does have available funding. It became very difficult to incorporate that into the ARPA calculations because we don't know what it's going to be. And so in the interest of just, I have to file a report in April. And then finally, it's just a sort of one of these weird, quirky things that I drive Mary crazy trying to figure out how to deal with it. So basically, at some point, about 2 years ago, so we got our ARPA funding, and it was all classified, understandably, as ARPA funding. For reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, we subsequently got a letter from the state basically saying that they had reclassified a very small portion of it, specifically $5.27, as, wow. I think what happened is there must have been some adjustment between the federal government and the states. Maryland had already given all the municipalities and counties their money, and so basically that became considered a general state revenue. So the town had recognized that $5.27, essentially $6 as ARPA funding, but it's not actually ARPA funding. So,
Sounds like some fines headed our way.
yeah, so it's just sitting there. It's not really ARPA funding. It's not something that I can report to the feds as ARPA money, because if it doesn't match to the dollar, they'll kick my report back, is what I've been told. So at some point, we'll probably just work with the auditors this year to figure out how do we reclassify that money internally. But if you're seeing that there's $6 left over in ARPA funding, that's why. It's just because of the state. So that's kind of the high-level overview. If there's certainly any questions about the budget amendment, I'd be happy to answer them.
I wanted to ask a question, Barb, because I was looking at some of the increases in the budget from 2023 to 2025 that you provided, and some of them are big jumps. So I'm just wondering, overall, what's the increase in revenue from last year to this year, and what's the increase in expenses from last year to this year? Or you can write to me if you don't have it off the top of your head.
Well, yeah, certainly I think on the revenue side, are you looking at the historical information, Lisa?
Yeah.
We're jumping ahead to 26, but
Yeah, well, yeah, you can do 2025 or 2026. I was
Okay, I
looking
can
at-
do it, if you're okay, just in
Yeah.
the next section of it.
That's fine.
So I've got a question
Sure.
with regard to the ARPA monies. So we've got a bunch left over. I see that, for instance, the 53,000, I assume, is to pay off the bill for the truck.
Yes,
Just haven't been paid for.
that's correct.
What about, for instance, Penn Place or the 74,000 for sidewalks?
So good question. So the $42,155 is for replacement of the fire alarm system. So
Okay.
that's been obligated. I checked in with them earlier today. They have gotten the permit, they've gotten through DPS. So now they're just evaluating their staffing in terms of when they'll be out. In terms of the streets and curbs, that's the residual payment that we owe SFMS. I actually got invoices earlier today. And then on the sidewalks, there's a residual piece we owe for that, but most of that is related to Waverly. We considered the lighting just to be part of the sidewalk project.
So you pretty much squared up with all the gymnastics you had to do with the ARPA?
Yeah,
to
I believe so. Well, I'm going to double check it again before you adopt, but it should basically tie exactly to what I have to report to the feds.
Yeah, but with this, in the things that you were outlining, I guess in what, October, November? December.
Yeah. Yeah, I think actually everything should be pretty much closed out by the end of the fiscal year, with the possible exception of Waverly lighting. I think it'll be a little bit tight, but it may bleed over a little bit into FY 2026. But we'll be well ahead of the schedule for actually getting the funds spent.
Barb, I had one question about the park, the state of Maryland park grants we have. Are those, do we have any period of performance limitations that we should be keeping awareness of?
For the grants that we had for Yendel. The state is fairly flexible. I had checked on that at one time. They normally want you to have everything done within 5 years. I think we'll be well ahead of that. I don't know, Chris, if you're okay. I mean, I think what we anticipate doing at the March meeting is, and I can just share it with you now, is basically with the feedback that we got on the comment cards, there was sort of a clear winner of the 3 concept designs, which was concept 1.
Could you please remind us what concept, which one that was? Well, thank you. It takes an architect.
It was not the very sharp angular one. It was not the kind of curvilinear.
Yeah, what did they call it? It had a tagline for
This
it.
was a very kind of, it wasn't full circles, it was half kind of crescents.
It had a lot of screening
The circles
trees.
were too.
Yeah.
Is the
So
one I
this-
wanted to put the putting green on.
Yeah, not the Minecraft
So
one.
it had a walking path that kind of did the arch up
Okay.
and around
All
the
right,
space.
glad to hear that.
It
Okay.
had a lot of screening trees along Jack Mandel's property line,
yeah.
I remember.
Yeah, it was the one they called, I was about to say concept 1, the circular defined space.
Yes.
It's a catchy title.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Thank
seemed
you.
like a little bit less formal than the other to you.
Okay. So we received those awards in FY '24, is that right?
It was actually this year's budget.
Oh, so we received that, so the first, so year one for that
We
5
should be-
years
yeah,
is
we're-
FY '25? Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, the state sort of backs everything up because their application process is in August, but then it's basically for the future fiscal year. So they can basically get all the projects because they have to go through the state legislature.
Okay.
So our thinking is at your next meeting is to sort of formally present that as the option that would be taken through mandatory referral and just get you all as a group to basically sign off on that so that Norton can go ahead and just do the finishing touches because there's a lot of requirements with mandatory referral beyond what you all have seen. So if that happens, I know Mike Norton told me he was hoping to file the mandatory referral application probably by the end of March, early April. And once that application is filed, the Planning Commission, there's 60 days that they have to act on it.
No, we can't make any changes after that?
We can, it's advisory, actually.
Okay.
So typically, the planning board will either approve with, recommended changes, or reject it, but ultimately, you just have to go through the process, but we're free to do what we want.
I wonder if it's not like a lot of other agencies where you can submit a concept and then they'll approve the concept, and then later you have to send your construction drawings, and if they match, then it's no issue. If they
Yeah.
don't match.
Once we go through mandatory referral, we don't have to go back, but they do have very specific requirements, like, I think we were exempted for forest conservation, but they'll probably want to know what some of the materials actually are for like the paths and things like that. And so what triggered it for Yendel is the fact that it was a its own single-family residential, but we're turning it into a park. And that there's a whole series of things that trigger mandatory referral. But to your point, Jerry, if all that happens, I know Mike Norton was hoping, there's 6 kind of different stages of their contract. Mandatory referral is the 5th, and then the 6th is basically helping with construction specifications and things so we can bid it out. So we should be well ahead of the 5 years.
Can you
Thank
remind us
you.
too, like, the 250,000 for that, was that a state grant including a town match, or is that the state grant and we have to match?
So there's 2 parts of that. There's roughly 197,000 that is community parks and playground, and that basically has 0 match. But we're also using program open space funds for the remainder, the delta, so about 53,000. When you use program open space funds, it triggers a 25% match for the overall project.
25 of the whole project.
Of the whole project. So the project budget was $350,000, $100,000 of which, just to use round numbers, which comes out to about 28%, is the town's match. There were certain expenses, the more tenured members may remember, that we had where we were getting the property surveyed, doing a hazardous materials building assessment that we could share with prospective bidders to take the house down. Those expenses were incurred before the state kind of gave a starting date for reimbursement where expenses counted. So those expenses did not count towards our 100,000. It wasn't that much money. They're part of those expenses included the $12,000 to clear out the house, but we were reimbursed by Mrs. Yendel's attorney gave us money, so for that. And then basically everything from including taking the house down, removal of invasives and the bamboo, all of those count towards the town's match.
It's roughly 250 plus 100, and we've spent
Right.
the lion's share of the 100.
Right, other
already.
than those few little things
Okay.
that were on the front end that don't count, Stephen, that's correct.
Now, for that, I know during some POSCO meetings, there was a discussion about putting some additional screening trees over on the other side.
To the right. if
To
you're
the
looking
right.
at it.
That's something I think you all can bring up if you wish. I mean, the budget's pretty tight. There are some trees, and this came up from a couple people, and Jack and I were talking about this last week. If you remember concept 1, and I can certainly bring it up, share the screen, but there were some trees, outside of the developable area. If you all want additional trees added, we'll just have to kind of cost that out and kind of see where we're at.
At the PASCO meeting, they were asking whether people who live adjacent or people in the neighborhood could just donate money for trees, and can we just plant some trees in the right, not in the area where we're gonna be developing Yandell, but like on the, just to screen the properties behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously two ways of handling that. If people want to, they can either, we either plant trees, or they could also plant trees on their own property to
Right.
screen. So
But
that's,
not on the Yandell property.
not unless that's something you all endorse, because I don't know that we normally,
We do accept donations
they could do-
for
Right,
trees.
they
That's
could
our
go through the-
memorial tree fund, which
Right.
we don't necessarily have to label a memorial,
memorial
a
tree.
donated tree.
Right.
So we do have an ability to accept donations for trees, so that is an option. Again, like you say,
there's a couple different ways to handle
property
that.
owners can put trees on their own property. We also could look at it as something that could be staged over time, so it doesn't have to be one huge investment up front. We could have a staged plan to use a little bit of our arboretum budget, for example, for increasing our tree cover in that area over time, which might help us to, once we do some of the initial work, get a better sense
Of
of
how it
what
looks.
we want and need, rather than tying ourselves down up
That was
front.
part of what my discussion with Jack last week is, perhaps just let everything get put in and have people sort of assess it then and see what it actually looks like. So like I say, this will be an agenda item on your, at your March meeting. So I think certainly if there's any, adjustments you want made, I think that would be the time to do it. Because like I say, that concept plan will be part of what's submitted
But
to Park and Planning.
whatever that outcome, it won't happen in this fiscal year.
Correct.
Right,
So if we could sort of reserve the rest of that discussion,
fair.
let's finish with the mid-year adjustments. Are there any further questions or discussion?
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, just quick, so we only had to adjust, even though we're not showing as having the $250,000 from the state, we're only adjusting by 10 grand?
Right, so kind of, it sounds a little quirky, but when you're trying to work through the transfers, if all we were doing was removing 550,000 from the state and then removing 550,000 from the transfer, but we have these other areas where revenues are coming in higher.
Okay,
So the transfer basically doesn't get reduced by the full amount. So essentially, it seemed cleaner just for town hall, just to kind of make it even. But then to actually make the transfer align with where we are revenue-wise, it basically only a small amount had to be taken from Yandell.
okay.
Maybe the last question, but just curious, do you have a sense of the town office renovation in total? Like, what did it kind of amount to in rough numbers?
Yeah, I think I'm going off memory here, Stephen, but I think the overall project, other than, and when I say overall project, there was some initial
The planning study?
feasibility stuff that Lumber and Light did, if you remember
I'm
going
curious,
back
like with
about.
that, plus the construction, plus the
Yeah,
permanent, like,
once we
all
got
in.
through some of the initial Lumber and Light, and you all actually, for those of you who were on the council at the time, this goes back to August of 2022. So I'm kind of using that figure. It was around 232,000.
So that included the lumber and light studies, or,
It included the more detail, basically like furniture acquisition and some of that type of work
so
that
there's
they did.
another lumber and light fee before that? Plus
There
the-
was.
Plus 24 on top later, so 250 plus.
Yeah,
whatever that
it was like,
first fee
yeah,
was.
232, I think, then probably roughly, if you can count the early Lumber and Light work that was charged to professional fees.
Yeah, I kind of remember that being like 20.
It was about 20, yeah, it was roughly about 250.
So it was like 250-ish. total.
Yeah, so right now, if you look at, for the budget amendment, well, if you look at the budget amendment, you'll see there was about $2,815 left in the office, and then we're kind of redistributing that. That was what was left. As I mentioned, there was about $24,000 worth of permit-related stuff that we just kind of stopped purchasing things to make sure that we didn't go over.
So plus or minus 250.
Yeah, just right about that.
Oh, I've got another question.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of an odd question, but if you look at the one sheet where you've got 5.3.4 gifts sanitation crew, I noticed there appears to be, and I looked on a different sheet, there appears to be some money left over, like we didn't spend it all.
Are you looking at operations, Phil? Trying to make sure I'm looking at the right.
12.0 miscellaneous receipts. Revenues.
Oh, that was later. So the gifts to the sanitation crew, that's been paid out. So what
Okay.
happens is when we get donations, they're initially reserved as reserve funds. And then once we get to the point that we're paying out the holiday gifts, then it shows up on the operations page.
Oh, that's where I saw it. It was on the back of the
Yeah,
reserve fund summary.
yeah, that's all been paid out now.
And the additional allocation, what is that?
So that's something I need to review with Mary. So we have to make assumptions for the capital PEG funds that we get through the Verizon franchise agreement. And we also receive estimates from the state for highway user revenue. I believe what happened was that basically some of those underperformed. Basically, I think it was particularly highway user revenue.
Okay.
So when you adopt the budget, we go use those estimates, and basically the money's already transferred in reserve because those funds are restricted in use. So if it comes in under, then we're left with this kind of quirky little amount. One option would be, to transfer that money out of reserves, if that's something you all are interested in doing, but that's essentially what happened.
Okay. Or you could transfer it, theoretically, we transfer it to the operating reserve. We could transfer it to the operating reserve?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Or you can even transfer it out of reserves altogether.
So, attachment 2, at the very bottom, it says, revenue in excess of expenditures.
So that's the budgeted, right? This was the budget that was essentially adopted. That would be amended.
Revenues in excess of expenses.
She's on this one, which we
Oh, yeah.
haven't gotten to yet.
We're not on
We
that
haven't
one
gotten
yet.
that to that.
We're on
yet.
the- we're on the
We're
other
still
one.
on the mid-year.
Sorry,
That's okay.
when we get there.
Anything further on ordinance 2025-1? All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of introducing ordinance number 2025-1, which consists of attachment 1 to the memo, a 3-page attachment. Please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, that is introduced. The specified interval after a proposed ordinance is introduced, if the minimum that it needs to sit before it's voted is 6 days. So we can adopt this introduced ordinance at the regular March meeting. All right. So that brings us to fiscal year 2026 budget development. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss largely in general terms, policy, if you will, the initial steps for fiscal year 2026 development, specific dollar figures to the extent that you wish to, but the intent here is to finalize this at our next meeting, and either introduce it then or at the special meeting of March 24, a month from today. In that case, it could be voted, in either case, it could be voted upon at the April meeting for adoption. All right, so Barbara, do you want to start us off?
So I'll just give you some highlights, and then we can kind of jump into your discussion. So hopefully what I wanted to do tonight is just share some information on the revenue and expenditure outlook. I'm hoping to get some direction this evening on the real and personal property tax rates.
May I interrupt?
Sure.
Do we have to admit people to Zoom?
No, they can just join.
They just join? Okay.
Yep.
I shouldn't be surprised, but I was sort of expecting one person.
I think I can guess who that is.
You never
If there
know.
had been someone waiting in a lobby, we would have seen a notification pop up on screen
Yeah.
saying.
Then we would have to admit that.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm sorry for the.
That's okay. Get some guidance on the employee wage adjustment rate, if any. Talk a little bit about our Arboretum funding, and also have you all discuss your capital budget fund priorities. So just as a reminder, there are very limited ways for municipalities in Maryland to actually generate revenue. The revenues we bring in not only have to support the day-to-day operations, but also fund capital improvements. And essentially, the revenue drivers for the town are two items. One is real property tax revenue, and the other is income tax receipts. So all town property was reassessed by the state in calendar year 2023, with an effective date of July 1st of 2024. Any increase in new market value gets phased in over the next 3 tax years, so FY 2026 is the second year of that phase-in period, which most of you probably know from getting your own property tax bills. So every Valentine's Day, the State Department of Assessments and Taxation sends me the constant yield tax rate certification paperwork. I don't know why they picked Valentine's Day, but it's been that way for the 20-plus years I've worked in the state. So our net assessable real property tax base is projected to increase by 3.09% from FY 2025 to 26. As a reminder, the real property tax rate for the town is 0.2045 per $100 of assessed value. What they do with the constant yield tax rate certification is to figure out, they give you a constant yield tax rate, which as the name implies is what would the tax rate need to be to keep the level of revenue generated equal. So the constant yield tax rate for FY 2026 is 0.1984 per $100 of assessed value. If you keep the same tax rate or you reduce the tax rate, there's really nothing I need to do except file paperwork with the Department of Assessments and Taxation for those entities who raise their tax rate. There's a kind of almost a regulatory process you have to go through in terms of where.
Public hearing, right, with
You have to have
advertising.
public hearings, you have to publish it in a newspaper of general circulation.
So this is going down a little bit.
The constant yield tax rate, it's been about the same for 2025, but basically what it's an indication of is that the town's assessable base is increasing.
Right.
Property values are increasing.
We had some new houses too.
Yeah.
We can leave it
You
at
can-
the same rate,
yes,
even if it,
Yes, you can.
okay.
Whether you leave it or you decrease it, you don't have to go through the
Right.
public.
There was a period of time where, yeah, you could just, you were considered exempt if you weren't going to generate more than additional 25,000. There was a state law passed within the last couple years. They're kind of not considering you exempt, but you're exempt from all the procedures as long as you're not raising your tax rate.
Thank you for explaining that. And
Yeah,
59 minutes less than the hour tax chantry you spent on it.
it's pretty simple.
So basically, if we just leave it at the 20.45,
All I need to do is report to the state that we left the tax rate the same.
but at the same time, that gives us additional revenue.
Correct.
How much additional do we estimate?
We'll bring in about 678,000 if the rate is left the same, and I think in the budget adjustment, and it's a little bit complicated because you always have late payers and things like that, but with the budget amendment, it will raise real property tax revenue to about 649,000. So it's not an inconsequential amount of money.
And just some history on it in case anybody's interested. Stop me if nobody has interest in it. But when I first joined the council, 2017, our rate was 21.
Yes.
And Peter Benjamin, he was mayor at the time, he proposed, I don't really recall the rationale, but with the Trump first administration, he thought things were going to change and potentially in a bad way for here. So he wanted to drop it, so he dropped it to 0.20.
Okay.
And then the 2045 came maybe, was it 18 or 19, Phil? That we had a very long meeting with this budget process in town office, and Khaki Chantry was, like, I think she was mostly just wanted to do something different than what Peter Benjamin did, but a very tortured process got us to
Okay.
0.2045.
So part of the budget adoption
Can I ask
ordinance.
one quick
Sure,
question?
go ahead.
Sorry, but if we go up from 1984, which is the amount in order to keep the revenue the same, and we go back to 2045, do we get 100% of the delta? Or does the state keep a lot of that? We just
No,
get
they're
some of
really, it's
it?
just a mathematical exercise. So what they're basically saying is that if you want to keep your revenues equal, then by their estimation, the 0.1984.
Correct. It's there.
Yes, but there's no requirement that we do that or anything else. They're
Right.
just trying to give you, it's, I mean, the law goes back longer than I've been in the state.
So it sounds like we do keep all the money.
Yes, we do, yes,
Okay.
yeah. This is a local property tax, so
Thank you.
everything would come as ours, basically, from this tax.
Question on that, too,
Sure.
like, something I asked, like, years ago, when we moved up to 0.2045, is, and I know it's kind of hard, because, like, we don't really have any business tax income
Correct.
per se, you know, it's negligible in town, but like, do we know how, like, that rate is compared for, like, the type of setting like Garrett Park is? I mean, are we charging way more than like North
You know,
Bethesda, or way less, or
I can
like
look
Chevy
that,
Chase View?
I can look that up, because the county actually, I just need to find it on their website.
Yeah.
They actually publish as part of the information they have what the municipal tax rates are.
Yeah, I remember seeing we had a table back
I
then.
think I
like,
sent one last year.
yeah,
I'll
it's
find
like
it in their
50 lines or
budget,
something.
yeah.
I think we looked at Chevy Chase View.
I know like
and
Chevy Chase Village, I think for a long time has had no real property tax.
Wow.
Because of their income taxes. That's
There's an
why.
apples and oranges
Yeah,
Right.
it's really hard
thing
to.
there. It's very
compare.
hard.
It is,
because,
yeah,
Kensington, the residential portions might be demographically
but they-
comparable to ours, but they have a huge
Business.
commercial tax.
yeah, yeah.
Right, there's a big
And
difference.
there are some communities that we used to think of as analogous to ours. Somerset is rapidly approaching the Chevy Chases where they won't
Yeah.
need a property tax.
Yeah, it might already be there.
Because the income tax is throwing so much money.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting exercise, but you can't go too far down that line
Yeah.
in trying to compare property tax rate.
Well, we just have the revenue from Penn Place, right? And a little bit of, if we rent this out, I guess.
Yeah, I think to Chris's point, I think Kensington having a business sector, I think there's some of the other Chevy Chases that take in a portion of Connecticut Avenue and that business sector,
Right.
and it makes a huge difference if you have that kind of commercial base.
We can just put in a gas station and we'll
Yeah, there you go.
catch up.
So when you adopt your budget ordinance, the tax rates are set as part of that, and not only the real property tax rate, but the personal property tax rate. As a reminder, this is sort of assessed on kind of business equipment and inventory. For Garrett Park, most of the personal property is actually paid by utilities when you dig into it, and that rate is $1 per $100 of assessed value.
I assume then that black market must pay,
I'm sure they do for their, yeah, their refrigerators and all that kind
Right.
of stuff, yes. We might have a little bit, Phil, if somebody has a home occupation business and reports that. So our other large revenue source is
Serious trash can.
local income tax receipts. This is the town's share of the income tax received by the state from Garrett Park residents. It's a portion of what is often referred to as a county piggyback tax. The maximum that a county can assess under Maryland law is 3.2%, and that is the rate Montgomery County is set, and truthfully, most of the counties that I know have a 3.2% rate. So we receive 17% of the county income tax proceeds, is how this works. This is a very difficult revenue source to project under even normal circumstances. And part of that is we get sizable payments, and the largest comes in November. We also get fairly sizable payments in February, May, and June. I receive notifications from the state the last day of each month. But with sizable amounts of money coming in May and June, most municipalities have already adopted their budgets by then. So you're kind of having to try to forecast. We've talked about this a lot, but the pandemic really skewed a lot of distribution patterns. In the last couple years, there were extensions of state filing deadlines without any penalties for taking advantage of those. So a lot of people held on to their money and paid late. There was also just a lack of enforcement. We don't need to talk about this, but I just wanted to, it's not very, well, it's in your packet, but this will give you, this is a spreadsheet that I actually keep to kind of track where we're at. And if you kind of look down at the bottom, you'll see in FY 2024 receipts. This was basically the last year where people were filing, we were getting reconciling distributions. So if you look at it'll just give you some idea of how skewed the last couple years have been because of the pandemic.
Big number.
Yeah, and it was all basically driven by the payment we received in November 2023, which was one of the last reconciling payments under the pandemic extended deadlines. At the bottom is sort of my tracking. I update it every month, which is just sort of how is July through January comparing to other years. It would be great if 2024 was the model of that, but it's not going to be. So at this point, we're budgeted at $550,000. I'm waiting to kind of see what the February payment looks like to kind of try to make an educated guess for FY 2026, as well as just making sure we're on track for this fiscal year. Chris and I were talking earlier this afternoon just about sort of what's happening in the region. We obviously have a number of folks in town who work for the federal government, work for federal contractors. It's sort of just a period of sort of greater uncertainty than it typically has been. This will just kind of be what it is, but just waiting to see what happens in February to be able to make an educated guess, because we don't really get much in March or April. It's the May and June payments. Just a couple of things on just some other revenues. Highway user revenues, this is money that the state collects. They provide estimates periodically, and they will update them both for the current fiscal year we're in as well as forecasting for the coming year. Right now, their estimate is roughly $76,000. Just as a reminder, this is not general operating revenue. There are about 10 different uses of this revenue that is embodied in state law. We have been reserving our money for future road projects, and you're allowed to reserve funds for 10 years. And there is a state reporting process that I go through every year. The last estimate that the state provided was in December of 2024. I assume we'll be getting another one soon. Based on what they're forecasting for this year and what they're forecasting for next year, that'll be about a $9,000 increase. As I mentioned when Phil was asking about the additional allocation question, sometimes the state projections can be off, which is in fact what happened in FY 2024. The county tax duplication payment, there's several categories you can get tax duplication payments for. Pretty much all the municipalities in Montgomery County get one for road maintenance. That's historically been the only payment Garrett Park has received. I started a couple years ago. There is a provision in county law where you can petition for a new payment. And so I have filed in 2022, 23, and 24. First couple years got kicked to the curb mainly because I don't think the county knew what to do with it. The municipalities that are receiving money started receiving money under the park maintenance payment back in the mid-'80s. No one knows what that original number was based on, and they've just been simply adjusting it by inflation, mainly. So then the county codified those amounts in a 2022 expedited bill. We were not part of that. Then they pointed to the fact that we weren't part of the bill as saying we shouldn't get it. As I mentioned earlier, due to the good graces of Councilmember Stewart, she went ahead and lobbied her county council colleagues to include an amount in the county's FY 2025 budget, roughly $30,000. I filed again, as I said, this fall, and I did get a call on Thursday from a member, one of the assistant CAOs, basically letting me know that the county executive was including money in his proposed budget for Garrett Park for a park maintenance payment.
That'll be the first time we've gotten it?
We got it this year, basically through, I don't know if you consider it a tax duplication payment, but the county
got a
council
payment.
put it in.
So we got 30 grand before.
Yeah, so that, what they're trying to figure out, I've got some history with tax duplication in the county. I think the county executive's office, and I understand this, is wanting to come up with a formula. One of our fellow municipalities, smaller municipalities, is, I suspect, likely to lose in that process. And so it's been a little bit challenging for us because not all the municipalities want things being looked at because it may not work in their favor.
Sure.
I am going to talk to Councilmember Stewart because we were not part of that expedited bill, is to see if, I did pose this question to the Assistant CAO, should we be asking that part of the code be amended so we're actually finally embodied in it. They're hoping to actually finish their review and to come up with a formula later this year, but I do intend to talk to Kate about it and just get her recommendation.
Well, and notwithstanding the fact that the formula hasn't been adopted,
Yeah.
we are in this year's
Yeah.
proposed executive budget.
Yeah.
So we owe Barbara a tremendous debt of gratitude for pursuing this. And obviously, the best long-term solution will be to achieve a formula, but we are in the county executive's
Better than
budget.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's probably reasonable, when I looked at what some of the other municipalities are getting, I don't think, Kate Stewart had had me send her, actually, it was part of what I filed in 2023, which was sort of our estimated operating expenses. Oftentimes in the tax duplication process, you can also, like if you're contributing towards a capital account for something, which we clearly would be for like the replacement of the playground equipment. I think given that she was trying to do something a little out of sync last year, I think she went with the kind of what we gave as operating cost. And I think what the county executive's office is doing is just applying the same rate of inflation that they're doing for everybody else who is actually in the county code. So we'll see.
So on the tax duplication, the list I saw there, the first one is transportation. I assume that must be the
That's roads.
roads, okay.
Yeah, so what they do is they do a 3-year look back. The county has its road classifications, and they just simply take road miles and basically apply the county's average cost for maintaining 1 mile of roadway basically averaged over the prior 3 years, and it just becomes kind of a rolling average. But yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly what it is, Phil. Municipal refuse collection, as you all know, there's an annual household assessment for trash, recycling, yard waste, and large item collection. The assessment is designed to cover 100% of the service cost. This is a line item that you'll see on your, it's collected with the real property taxes, but it's not a real property tax per se. Our assessment this year was $427 per household, based on our contract cost with Ecology, and this was a figure Kayla had given you all last year. For FY 2026, that assessment would go to $439. Are there any questions about revenues? I apologize, I don't mean to move on too quickly, but I want to make sure we get to your discussion.
You didn't list it, at least I don't think you did, but composting is part of that refuse collection?
It is not part of that.
We're listing that
Correct.
separately?
Right.
Okay.
This is just strictly, and when you all adopt your budget adoption ordinance, in addition to real and personal property tax rates, it will be this household assessment, and that's what we report to the county, and that's what they key into their system since they bill for us.
Okay.
Kind of moving on to operating expenses. We are essentially a service industry, and like most service industries, a lot of our operating costs are personnel related. We do have 6 staff positions. One of the items I was hoping to get some direction on tonight was just what employee wage adjustment rate, if any, to base the budget calculations on. I did take a look at the consumer price index for all urban consumers for the Washington area. The last one that was available was measuring from January 24 to January 2025. That was 2.7%. I checked in with some of our neighboring small municipalities. They're all kind of on different budget cycles. Chevy Chase Village, this is actually their board has decided on 3%. Friendship Heights uses a personnel committee. They're recommending 3.5%. Kensington is expecting to have some discussions, but this is just a town manager. His recommendation is going to be 3.5%. He was looking at the 2.7 CPIU, just like I was, and basically just adding a little to round it up. So that's kind of the lay of the land of the municipalities who have decided anything. And some of the smaller municipalities only have one staff, so it's really not an issue for them.
Now, with that, are there merit increases also?
We have traditionally just done cost of living. None of the three that I mentioned here, Phil, said anything about merit. These were the numbers they gave me.
Okay.
The others,
Along
Yeah.
the lines of merit, is there an annual review? I'm sorry, it's a slightly.
providing feedback to employees on their performance.
When does that happen?
It depends on the anniversary date of the employee. So there's usually two ways of doing it. Sometimes it is anniversary dates, and sometimes it's fiscal year dates. It depends on where you work. I've seen it done both ways.
What do we do here?
We look at basically anniversary dates.
Okay.
I think you sometimes see larger organizations do it on fiscal year date, because that way they can just shove everything out at one time and have it come back in at one time.
And does the town manager undertake that process, or does the mayor have a role in that?
Typically for the office staff, it would be town manager, and then George Miller is actually the maintenance supervisor, so two of the staff people report directly to him.
Okay.
And I think generally, it's been more verbal kind of feedback.
Okay.
The other side of just personnel expenses is obviously the benefit side of things, and this is just more informational, nothing that you all need to do. So we are a participating agency with Montgomery County, like many of the small municipalities are. What this means is we get to take part in the county benefit programs. There was actually an agreement signed a number of years ago. One of the complications for budgeting is that the county's benefit plans are on a calendar year basis, with rate changes obviously effective January 1st. So half of our fiscal year is basically under rates that we have no idea what they're going to be. The county offers a number of medical plans that employees can choose from. And for calendar year 2025, which we're currently in, the lowest rate was 6.5% increase, and the highest was 12.1%. That may seem high. I actually worked in a jurisdiction once that got hit with a 25% rate increase in health insurance, which was a very gloomy day in the neighborhood. One of the county choices is Kaiser Permanente, that has a built-in kind of prescription drug plan. The other plans that are part of the county plan have a separate prescription drug plan, so that's a separate premium and a separate rate. So Kaiser was the 6.5%, the 12.1 were the Care First and the United Healthcare plans, which have a separate prescription drug plans, and the prescription drug piece went up 11.9%, which prescription drug coverage has largely been a lot of times what is driving medical premiums, no matter what plan you're under. We're okay for this year. We came in, the rates came in a little bit higher than I had anticipated. I think we'll, still be on budget for the benefit cost. I did reach out last week to the county's health insurance manager to see if she could give any guidance. Obviously, they're not going to say budget this and you'll be fine, because they don't know. They start meeting with their health insurance advisor generally in June, but she was going to reach out and see if the firm could provide some guidance that I could use. In the absence of, if they're unable to do that, and we're kind of hitting crunch time, I'll probably put in about a 10% rate increase for the prescription drugs and the plans.
And the town pays those
We
benefits 100%?
pay 100% if the employee has individual coverage. If you have
Family.
dependent coverage, then the town picks up 75% of that.
In addition, right.
Yeah, we'll just look at the entire premium. The town will pick up 75 and the employee picks up 25.
And we offer choice.
We do.
In the plans, the health plans and prescriptions.
Yes, and the employee can pick which plan they want.
Okay.
So if there's no question about the personnel side, I say we'll get to the decisions. Just wanted to kind of keep going. So this is just kind of a snapshot of what has been happening with our Arboretum management funding. There was a change in accounting practice in 2024. Typically, things like tree pruning, things like that are considered operating expenses, not capital. So you'll see kind of some, but we have made a very deliberate decision in the last couple of years to be increasing our investment in the Arboretum. And you kind of see that with these numbers. In 2024, the number was a little skewed because we did about $20,000 worth of work on the Grotto property. We had just acquired that. But this will give you an idea of sort of what we've been spending. I think the hope, I think, has been that we would kind of get into a regular cycle of elevation work, pruning, and things would kind of even out, because I think there had probably not been the investment that was probably needed for a period of a couple of years. But
Are the new trees on Waverly included in any of these numbers?
they would be considered part of the plantings, yes. Oh, well, yeah, that'll be coming up.
So, because you only got 81 in there, I think.
Oh yeah, cut off a little bit with this. Yeah, so right now, there was at one time so we sort of budget at the 13.5 level for everything trees and don't try to split it up by tree planting, but yeah, I think at this point, what will be covered in the ARPA budget, Lisa, would be just the pole, the actual physical installation of the poles.
Okay.
So this is just to give you an idea that we have been investing considerably in the Arboretum. I just received this today. I know Jerry Lee and Chris would have seen it probably over the weekend being circulated, but at your place was what the Arboretum Committee is recommending. So 12.1, there's two different kind of Arboretum accounts, covers full Normandy's fees as well as any kind of activities that the committee wants to do. It's $16,000 this year. They are recommending an increase to $17,000. Tree-related expenses, there's sub-accounts, as you just saw, but it's part of the broader 13.5, which is trees, parks, and grounds. So this is not the only thing. The committee is recommending $96,600. This would cover tree-related expenses, and the reason I wanted to call that out is because there are other items included in 13.5. So one of the other items, when you get to your discussion and at least preliminary direction, it would be helpful to kind of know what you want to do in terms of Arboretum-related funding. I did reach out to the other committees to see if what they were requesting. I think HPC met recently and elected a new chair, so I'm going to reach out to him. My understanding from Chris is that POSCO did not have any request for funding. And then the Archives Committee was scheduled to meet last week. Unfortunately, Sonia had an unexpected death in her family, so their meeting got rescheduled to this week, and I think they'll be talking about it then.
Who the HPC chair is now.
It's Jim Fleming, isn't it?
It's Jim Fleming.
Jim Fleming, yes.
And,
Jerry Lee touched on this. This is the compost collection program. You started a one-year pilot program in May of 2023. You did agree to continue this program for 2025. It's currently funded at $15,000, which is sufficient funding to provide a subsidy for up to 113 households. Kayla tracks the enrollment. She's the one who gets the bills. It's been very stable the last 12 months. We had a low of 74 households to a high of 77. It has not altered very much from that range. We do have another renewal in that we're eligible for in the contract, and that would go, if you so choose, into effect in May of 2025. So whether or not you're going to continue this program does have some time sensitivity to it, because if you were not to do that for some reason, we would need to provide Comcast crew some notice.
Don't you normally, in your monthly town manager thing in the Bugle, usually mention
I
that this exists?
periodically do.
Just curious if new residents knew, but I guess they should know.
We periodically mention, it's probably time to do that again if you decide to continue it, just because for a while it was so stable that nobody knew was enrolling, so it almost seems sort of redundant.
It's like a dozen-ish new houses though.
Yeah, there have been a lot, you're right.
That's true.
Yeah, we often, a lot of new residents will check in with us when they first move into town, which we certainly invite them to do in the Bugle, or they're planning to be moving into town and they just want to check on a couple of things. So we do try to let them know that the program is available if they want to do that. Just very quickly, because I want to get to your discussion, hopefully you'll have some robust discussion tonight about your capital budget funding priorities. Just a couple of things I just wanted to mention to kind of set the stage. We talked about this at your February Town Council meeting. Basically, our current CIP did not envision any road work being done in FY 2026. It has been a rough winter, as one of you commented on. And so I did ask Clark Azar to come out, and the person who did the original assessment, just to sort of check to see, if there's anything that's changed because of, deteriorating conditions faster than what we thought. We had previously basically looked at, beginning in FY 2025 through FY 3031, I think is what I have. For FY 2027 to 2029, there was projected road and curb work and these are inflationary values of 829,000. We currently, between highway user revenues and what is sitting in the capital budget right now, about 422,000. So we do have some time to build up to that. The 27 and 28 are funded. It was where we started getting into 29 that a lot of the expenses are scheduled to all hit at the same time. We can certainly control when that work is done, and I mentioned to Kayla earlier, I think after even just having the SFMSF work done, it's a lot for staff also to manage when you have lots and lots of capital work going on. So that may need to be smoothed out a little bit. Some other items that, I just wanted to get on your radar screen, and this was something that, was envisioned in the CIP. We have some fencing that we wanted to replace in its entirety at the south end of Montrose and also at the end of Claremont. This was an envisioned project. It was mentioned in the CIP we talked about last year. The anticipated cost is $10,000. It's not funded at this time, but this work was discussed previously. Obviously, you've had some discussions about repairing the masonry wall at the pool property. As you know,
Is there any estimate? I mean, I know that estimates being developed. Is there any round clue?
I think we originally had an idea of about $35,000. The work has been scaled back, I think, based on the approach you all have talked about. I know, Stephen, I think you were going to talk to someone who does like landscaping.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to literally do that, so I kind of was winging it myself, but I think I ended up having probably it's a little bit too cautious, but I was just adding up some cost potential, ranges for it, so maybe what was it?
Thinking.
Number. It's the wrong one. Out of here. It's buried. There we go. I was just figuring 10 to 15,000 for kind of the survey, the design. So we really need to do it as a professional design, not just kind of pointing do this. So 10 to 15 for that. Masonry work, I was wondering if it would be 15 to 25K, maybe a little bit conservative. And then the grading and landscaping and a plaque might be 15 to 25K. So it kind of would be maybe optimistically 40 up to worst case 65. That was just me. Actually, that's not too far off your number then. So that could work out.
Chris, I know you've looked at this more closely recently than I have, but as you all know, we own the grotto property. There is actually a stone grotto there. There's probably some, nothing significant, but I think some corrective work, repair work that should be done.
I'll try to get something before our next session, but I would be surprised if it were anything above 15,000.
Okay. Yeah, it's not in terrible shape. The other thing George and I have been talking about is kind of transitioning from, using of a salt spreader to brine, which is what a lot of jurisdictions do. This would be a new project that we haven't talked about before. The estimated cost would be about $12,000. Basically, I think George has seen some studies that basically You can reduce your product usage, meaning salt, by like 70% because you're not having to spread as much. It's a much more efficient way of basically treating roadways, also treating sidewalks. And besides being cost effective, it's also more animal friendly because you don't have the huge chunks of salt getting caught between puppy paws. So you are seeing a lot of jurisdictions who've moved to this. We would basically be buying, one piece of equipment to spray and probably something, kind of a walk-behind system to use on sidewalks that we're responsible for.
The new equipment that we spray would go on a truck.
It would go on a truck, yes.
Isn't sawdust also commonly used?
I haven't seen that. I've heard some jurisdictions it's not particularly effective. Some people use beet juice, actually. I've seen that in some jurisdictions. It's not considered to be that great, but
Didn't,
Kind of a last resort if your supplier runs out of salt. I saw it more in kind of rural Pennsylvania where I was before. We also sometimes had to use ash if we were really, because periodically if the major roads to truck in more salt got shut down, the state couldn't dig them out. We kind of had to work with what we had.
yeah.
I don't recommend it.
if I seem to remember correctly, at one time Garrett Park used sand as a standard to avoid the salt impacting our trees. Do you remember, Chris? Does anyone know why we maybe switched to salt? And do we believe that it's actually been a worthwhile switch?
I think I've usually seen sand used more for like traction, like on hills, but not.
Well, it also, if the sun hits it, it also helps melt ice faster, just sand.
Okay.
And the town actually uses a blend, it's not all sodium chloride.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that, for example, if you walk your dog, where we've spread stuff, they tend not to have problems. If you walk your dog across the part that Mark
Oh, it's terrible.
uses sodium chloride and way more of it than they should. So it's, I'm sorry, I'm taking too long. It's less hard on pets. It's less hard on trees to the extent that when it melts and splashes,
The mix that we're using.
the mix that we use. Yeah. Years ago, it was sand because of the concern for the trees. And it was simply not effective in certain places. They would do the hills and not the flats. If you used it everywhere, it would just be immense amounts. The current maintenance shed was built as a sand storage shed. Almost immediately, it was used for a salt storage shed.
Which is why you've got all the
means
corrosion.
that although that was a very short period of time, it means to this day we have corrosion in there. And then with the advent of the Arboretum in particular, the idea was to try to cut down the adverse effects on trees. Sand was used, that was found not to be very effective. Long story short, the guys are pretty conservative
Yeah.
about the way they spread it, and they know the spots, the hills, the parts that don't get hit by sun, so on and so forth. And they allow that to guide their application of it. All of that said, the brine would be better.
Would the brine, how would that impact currently we have a mix of sand and salt. So the brine would be better overall than the mix?
No, the current mix is sodium chloride and magnesium.
Ah, okay, sorry, I
I
misunderstood
think
you.
they use a little sand occasionally in a few plots.
Yeah, not many
but
though.
By and large, sand does not figure in our snow treatment.
Okay.
I wonder, does George have a network of other maintenance people he can talk to about how this plays out in actual?
I don't know, but I can certainly connect him with some public works folks where I used to work. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and also, does it get stored in big barrels, or how do you store it? I don't know.
There's actually a thing that you mix it in, so you mix it up before each application, but I would say brine's been used in a lot of places I've worked, and they have moved away from just strict salt for both cost-effective reasons, and a lot of the places I've worked are very similar to Garrett Park in terms of their trees and pets and things like that. So this is not new technology, it's been around for a while.
Isn't that what they use to pre-treat the roads? Because you usually can see
Typically.
the little stripes.
Yes,
Oh,
yeah,
down the
that's
road.
exactly what it is.
Strathmore's been brine for several years
Yeah.
now, I think.
Well, except in the first of the two snowstorms, it wasn't.
Well, they did salt, then.
Oh.
It was salt. It, just from the appearance of it, it looked like it might also be a formula of some kind that isn't pure sodium chloride. But sometimes the distributing mechanism malfunctions and you end up with these huge
Lots of
piles.
salt.
Oh, yeah, you get
And there was one at Keswick and Strathmore before the first of the two heavy storms.
Which usually I go down there with my shovel to get
And it,
salt and spread
yeah,
around.
it remains there forever. The other thing is, it's a state highway, very few two-lane state highways.
Yeah.
The spreaders are geared to multi-lane, much wider.
Yeah.
So that people, and when it is a salt formula of some kind, people end up with it in their front yards on either side of Strathmore, because it's just spewing it out.
They don't want to hit 75%.
On the occasions they pre-treated with brine, it was terrific from any number of standpoints, including that overshot problem. We might want to talk to State Highway about it at some point, but for our own purposes, it's very useful. You can pre-treat farther in advance. So if we're not sure whether the storm's going to come in at 2 PM or 2 AM, you don't have to agonize over it quite so much. But it's the perennial problem. We're a small town. We have the need of this occasionally, but not often enough to amortize the cost, the instruction cost and everything else. And the guys may not be able to do it often enough to maintain their skills at it. So it would really be nice if George or someone could talk to another
Yeah, I can connect him with some folks.
medium-smallish municipality and just see how it works.
Sure.
How are their pickles?
Yeah,
Are you suggesting maybe they look at whether it could be contracted out, like if these other towns contracted out?
well, that actually wasn't my point, but I wonder if that's,
Yeah.
the trouble with contracting out is, again, we're small,
Yeah.
we're at the end of the road, but, no pun intended. But the fact that you can pre-treat with brine so much earlier may offset some of that.
And it was just like short on equipment space and everything else, and then they'd have to be mixing up
Yeah.
brine. I wonder if that's,
Yeah.
you know, if like, say Kensington, twice our size, if they are doing that way. maybe
Yeah, I'll
it's
check with some of
worth
the
us
other managers. I
looking into.
know several of the smaller municipalities like us have their own maintenance staff. There's others that are so, their staff is so small, they don't have maintenance folks, like, and they basically just contract out. I imagine those folks probably use salt because it's probably not worth the investment. So
This doesn't look like a huge investment,
it's not.
but the training and the continuity of
Yeah.
service
Yeah.
sound like issues.
And it
Yeah,
has to be stored in the off-season, which
Right.
storage
Yeah.
is always a problem.
so that's kind of setting the stage, kind of some decision points. As I said, these are kind of considered preliminary, I guess, in the sense that until you actually vote for the budget ordinance, these are not finalized, but certainly guidance is needed on these issues in terms of just actually being able to put together a budget proposal for you all to even consider.
Now, quick question
Sure.
before we leave this one. I thought we had a law, not a law, ordinance possibly, or resolution that we weren't supposed to use salt.
I've never come across that, but you're my historian, Phil.
I remember Hans Wegner bringing that up, and we talked
I can look through the resolution
quite a
directory.
bit about it, and it became that we weren't supposed to use salt. And I don't recall.
We've got a kind of a list of recent resolutions, so I can go back and just see if there's something that has a header that
Yeah.
says something to that effect.
Perhaps less than recent, however.
Yeah, I might go back, well, Sonia will be in tomorrow. Research request. So I think kind of two slides of, sort of just trying to get your guidance. One is obviously the real property tax rate, because that certainly sets the stage for revenues if, is the
You're
intent.
proposing to have it be a little higher, the same as last year, and we'll generate a little more money than what the county said we needed.
The rate would remain the same, not
Yeah.
higher.
Correct.
from last
Which
year
is
to this
nice.
year. Right.
Yeah.
For us, right?
Yes.
Electorally, for you.
So is that the consensus of the group, is at first pass to leave the real property tax rate the same?
Correct.
We can certainly use the money in those
Okay.
respects,
I mean,
so.
how often do we actually raise it? I mean, is
Well, I
that
think Phil
happen
gave you
here?
Stephen gave you the history.
Yeah,
Just a couple of times.
Yeah, I don't think it's good timing to try and raise it, but I think keeping it the same is prudent.
Okay.
I only wondered if it was, maybe a thought to like lowering it a little bit if, with the uncertainty of what's going on.
I think we have a lot of uncertainty in our own budget as well, however.
Yeah.
Yeah. The personal property tax rate doesn't generate that much money. It's roughly $20,000. So it's $1 per $100 of assessed valuation. Any change in that?
Do we have to go through a special,
No, nobody cares about personal property tax rates.
I would just observe incidental intelligence, not of any particular import, that a priority for the Maryland Municipal League legislative initiative is to get municipalities the authority to levy food and beverage tax. There's no such authority in the state of Maryland. Wouldn't affect us much, and I'm not sure we want to do it, but
For food
Just-
and beverages that are sold in their municipality or purchased by their residents
No,
anywhere?
sold.
no.
So Black Market Bistro's not gonna like
No.
it.
Yeah.
But
Correct.
it would affect only black market.
Yeah, but is it a substantial tax normally, or
Feel very singled out.
is it usually a big tax?
One of
Maybe
the,
consequential.
one of the MML legislative committee people went and bought an identical meal in Maryland, Virginia, and DC. Virginia and DC have food and beverage taxes. And an identical meal at a chain restaurant. So all the variables were held level except for food and beverage tax, and Maryland was by far the least expensive. So I'm sorry, short answer, it can be a major revenue producer if you're a large enough jurisdiction.
Yeah,
For us,
I wonder if it's
And
worth the
Black Market, we
benefits.
just negotiated a higher lease for them, so they're paying us a lot more money
yeah.
than years past.
Zero.
It seems prudent to keep that
Yeah,
one
and keep
steady as well.
Same, okay. Kind of switching to the, kind of some of the funding levels, is if you all have at least a preliminary indication of any adjustment in employee rates, if any, that you would like me to base the personnel calculations on.
And that would be on top of
Yes.
the increase in the medical cost that we pick up 100% of.
Right, other than, right, the split is the same, whether it's, we pick up our share, so if it's
Right.
for our individual, we pick up
So
all
that
of
would
it.
be in addition to this wage.
That's correct,
adjustment.
this is just the salary line item
Okay.
itself.
So we should probably, do 3% or 3.5%, right?
Or double.
You have
that's in there.
2.7, right?
2.7 was the change in the CPIU, yes, from January to January.
I was gonna propose 3 anyway.
So 2.7 was
That's sort
the
of the inflation
CPU
factor,
from year to
yeah.
year.
But that
But
was,
our neighboring jurisdictions are doing 3 to 3.5.
Yes.
right.
Yeah, some of them have not, like I checked in with Somerset, he actually emailed me just as the meeting was starting going, "So what are you all doing?" I said, I'll be able to tell you probably tomorrow. And I'll have a better idea what Kensington is doing after this week, I believe. I've heard 3%, anybody?
Why don't you plug in 3% for
Okay.
now?
Okay, everyone okay?
Seems
Which is,
reasonable.
this is for the draft.
Right.
Yeah, and I'd be interested in knowing what the revenue increase.
Sure, I know, it's a little bit
is
hard
as a
right now.
percentage, Because it's all related.
Yeah.
You know,
Right,
you don't
you
wanna-
kind of need to see the
it
whole
needs to be
picture.
sustainable.
Yeah.
Right.
The Arboretum funding, as I mentioned, you have the Arboretum committee recommendation. It's split among two different accounts essentially, but they're recommending 113,600.
And last year it was 141,000.
Right, about 20,000 of that was work that we took over when we got the Grotto property, so
Seems
that
like if
was,
you took that out, it comes out in this.
yeah,
rough
that was
range.
$20,000 that, isn't
It's a
repeating.
large line item, right?
It is, that's
There
one of the
was-
reasons why I wanted to put it on here.
Also some catch-up pruning of
There was some catch-up work,
trees on Strathmore. And
Right.
although we were reimbursed
a little
a
bit.
tiny fraction
Yeah.
of it by the state, which is a good thing, not a bad thing, but in this particular instance, it was relatively small. And if you've ever wondered what it looks like when trees are pruned, it's hard elsewhere in town, because there's a tree here and a tree there,
Yeah.
depending on its age and one thing and another. But Strathmore was all done at once.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the change, the improvement was quite dramatic. But that had been deferred for a whole bunch of reasons, including the pandemic, which we're going to blame everything on, and execution of a revised MOU, which Barbara handled very well, but it took time. So that sort of accumulated, the need for the pruning accumulated, and then it was done all at once. And it was worth every penny if you look carefully. It's vastly improved. The elevation improves the street lighting at night, and it just looks a lot better. And that was not a one-time in the sense that it'll have to be done from time to time going forward. But it was, because it was done all at once, it'll be a few years before we have a major
Right.
expansion.
Yeah, I
in
mean,
Strathmore.
and I think it is important to note that the committee is recommending a reduction from last year's cost
Right.
fairly
Pretty
significantly.
big one.
Yeah, and I think that's a recognition, as Chris was alluding to, that we've been making an investment and we were playing catch-up, and we can probably hopefully kind of get into a
Right.
more even pattern of what we've been doing.
And it does allow them to continue the newer effort to manage the invasives in public spaces. And I think that's been a small pilot that has been pretty successful. You know, it's one of those things where we can always adjust at the mid-year if
Right.
something happens that we recognize it's, you know, not adequate, or for whatever reason, it's more than we need. But also, given the conversation we had about the park planning too, it's a good thing to sort of keep an eye on how the two interrelate.
And these numbers include Phil Normandy?
They do.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Phil is notoriously slow in giving us invoices. He improved for a while, but he seems to have
He's also quite generous with his
Back.
time.
Yeah.
He is. He does not nickel and dime us, and he does a lot of things just because I think he enjoys helping residents in terms of talking about their trees and things like that.
He was patient with me when I sent him the same tree like 3 times.
So it sounds like, is everyone
I'm fine
comfortable
that.
with what they
I'm fine with
recommended?
that.
so I was wondering, because if you look at last year and you take out 20K, that brings you 121.
Yeah.
And then you look at 23, and that was 124. So if you want to throw in some inflation, you know, it's kind of like, I mean, I'm fine with keeping it at 113.6, but I'm just wondering whether or not we're going to exceed that.
Yeah, it's a good question, Phil, because if you look at what we've spent year-to-date, and we obviously haven't done the spring pruning,
Yeah.
but year-to-date this year, we've spent $50,000. And I'll be surprised if we hit anywhere near the levels.
Okay.
So, I mean, and part of what we spent this year, we also had a heck of a huge tree that was over about $6,300 to remove, that one tree.
The one
which is,
run by his house, right?
One by my house.
yes, that would be the one. So, I mean, I do think that, and Phil Normandy and I have talked about this, I do think we're starting to see a pattern where we can level out, but that has not been the case the past 3 years. I think we were playing catch-up, and now we should be able to.
Seems like we're in better shape now.
I think we are.
A lot of-
Yeah.
a lot of change.
Right, and we've had, for a few years running, a number of special projects.
Right,
I
yeah,
like the mouth, like into Porcupine Woods was done, and
yeah.
a bunch of other stuff.
And
like that.
over there at the Rokeby crossover into
Yeah.
White Flint Park and the estates.
Okay.
So at first blush, you want to stay with the committee
I'm okay with
recommendation?
one.
Sure.
Okay, and we'll see.
Sure.
I'm only bringing up the compost collection program just in the sense that it's been sort of a year, it's newer and it's been sort of a year to year. So I think kind of two questions. One is, do we continue it? If so, what level of funding do we include? As I mentioned, we've budgeted $15,000 for the 2 years, but I think we are seeing enrollment, and Kayla can certainly speak to this. We're not really getting to that 113 households. It's been pretty steady. So I think if it's something you want to continue, you might be able to scale it back a little bit, and then we can do another promo and try to.
How many households is it getting to?
You know it off the top of your head.
70, right?
So our lowest over the past 12 months has been 74 households. Our highest has been 77. I want to say we are at a flat 75 currently. Please don't quote me on that. I'm waiting for the most recent bill.
Just quoted that.
But what I would say is we are currently subsidizing at a cost of $11.39 per household. If you wanted to reduce it, but still maintain funding with some optimism to get more households coming on board, I would suggest that you basically fund it at 12,000 instead of 15,000. That would let you support 85 households. It's important to note the cost is tied to the consumer price index year over year. So it went from $11 flat our first year to $11.39 per household. I haven't run the math, so I'm casually estimating, as I scribble in my notebook, $11.75 per household. So $11.75 per household, 85 households if you want to be optimistic about supporting our current households with still having room for growth. That would bring us to just about $999 per month. So a nice flat 12,000 would give us some wiggle room if you wanted to continue to support it. Obviously, if you'd rather scale it back further or just continue to be optimistic and keep it at a flat 15,000.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that budgeted amount is a very small cushion that allows us to have some flexibility elsewhere in the budget. 15,000 compared to 12,000 is a pretty small difference. And I personally think that right now, in the town of Garrett Park, I would not want us to be sending a inadvertent message that we're not supporting our environmental programs.
What is the environmental purpose?
It's
Because-
it's multifold. It keeps carbon out of the solid waste stream, which has been shown to be,
Is the pickup weekly?
yes, detrimental.
And the containers I see are about,
They're
yeah,
little green
Like a
ones.
medium and a
There's
large.
So
two
there are
different
two sizes.
Two options.
So one is a 7 liter, one is a 12 liter. Our subsidy rate is tied to the smaller of the two at the 7 liter because that's what most households that are with Compost Crew use. They can still get the subsidy if they go to the 12 liter. It's just that the resident portion scales up higher. I think that scales up from being about $12-ish for their monthly portion to closer to 20-ish for their monthly portion. There are households, not many of them, I think it's less than 15 across the entire program, that do, either due to family size or how they eat and generate waste, that find it valuable. But we haven't seen anyone.
is there any way to quantify any of this?
I can shoot an email over to my contact at Compost Crew, asking her to pull the most recent numbers about who's using what size,
I mean, the
and
benefits.
I can start looking into that.
There
That
are-
might also be a
I
Compost
can
Crew
forward
question.
you some of the, I can forward you some of the research, like the folks from GP Can and others shared when we were looking into this.
I just see this guy in a pickup, which is a internal combustion engine, going around picking up, driving it. Where do they compost it? I
They
assume
take
it's-
it to a county facility. Actually, I think it might be shared with Prince George's.
and
Eventually
then
they
driving
bring back.
back.
And then they provide
goes to the
back
landfill.
soil to each participating property once per
Happens to be
year.
in plastic. but
Yeah, that's
okay.
fair.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a one-time delivery
Yeah, yeah.
of soil and plastic. It's
Yeah, mine's like laying on the lawn there, I gotta spread it around. See.
I just wonder what the net carbon reduction is. I realize they take more,
They do, they take a
Then-
lot of
then you
food
can
waste that
compost
people are
on
not
your-
able to compost at
Yeah.
home.
The other side benefit we talked about back when this was discussed before is there were some strong proponents of composting themselves on their own property, but then that brings in a higher chance of raccoons and so on and so forth. We've been doing the
no,
composting, we've
there's,
got a
there are
lot
things
less
you
raccoons.
can't compost,
Yeah,
meat bones,
Right.
yeah,
that apparently these people take, is that right?
yeah.
I tried this program, I was doing it all, and then I had raccoons who were coming at night and knocking them over and figured out how to open it, and made a huge mess in my backyard. So since I've moved, I haven't started it up again.
I haven't gotten
Well,
I
that
wrote
open.
to
We don't need
Compost
to-
Pro and said, can you have a better latch or something, but they never got back to me.
I
There are a
didn't mean,
few pretty strong proponents in town, and I can definitely reach out to some folks to see if there's some updated data we can share. But I do think that when we have the bandwidth, maybe another survey, to see how the people who are using it feel it works for them would also be beneficial.
It's a whole different scale with the company I work for. That's a huge deal for the operations crews to like do all the composting and they actually get fuel out of some of it somehow. So
okay, I didn't mean to beat
Oh,
this
that's
to death,
okay.
and it is only 12,000 in the.
So I'm
15.
hear- I'm hearing 15,000.
No, no,
Is
for the
everyone,
upcoming
at first
year,
blush, is
I
everyone?
heard a
Right, and I was
recommendation.
suggesting
Yeah.
If you wanted to reduce it, my suggestion was that you could safely drop it to 12. But Jerry's made the salient point that she doesn't necessarily see a value in
It's not that
reducing it
much
by
money.
3,000.
shifting a couple $1,000 each
Especially
year.
the message it sends.
Right,
to
I think the message that sends right now could perhaps be upsetting to some residents.
Yeah, especially at
The
this
the
time.
flip side of that is we're subsidizing a quarter of the households in town to the tune of over $100 a year.
But it is a voluntary opt-in. They pay the remainder. We're not paying for the full amount.
Okay.
I can't remember what
What
percentage it was.
proportion do we pay?
50%, our 50% goes up by the CPI on an annual basis.
Okay.
So it was very much structured to have, and Jerry was a great help with this.
Okay.
The residents have some skin in the game. They have to buy the actual containers they use, and then they have to, on a monthly basis, or annual if they choose to pay that way, contribute to the overall cost of collection. We do benefit, we're not the only municipality in this area that is signed with Compost Crew, that
Yeah.
does help us get a better rate overall.
And certainly if we were doing 100% subsidy, I'm pretty sure we would get a lot more participation.
Yeah, I think to
I
Kayla's.
think that's what we
I
discussed
think,
years ago.
yeah, I think to Kayla's point, I had when we were first looking into this, it was Chevy Chase Section 3, and that, I remember her saying, make sure there's some skin in the game, because otherwise people sign up for it and then don't
then
use
don't
it, and
actually
then
use
the
it, right.
municipality's paying for it.
What I can say from kind of keeping track of other Compost Crew clients, because there are also a number of Virginia municipalities that have introduced a program. Several of them have chosen to structure it where you get, your first 6 months free, and then it's on the resident to continue paying for it. If we were to look at a different way to structure the program, we could look at a similar X number of months paid by the town to get you in the habit, and then kind of, the training wheels come off, you're on your own.
That sounds like one of those really bait and switch streaming service.
There's a reason that we didn't structure the program this way. It's just an option that I do want to make you aware of. Some contemporaries in the region have used. So if there are concerns, we have options.
I will reach out to some of the advocates on the education.
So we put 12,000 in for FY.
I'm hearing
Of
15, I'm hearing
15. Oh,
15.
15,
Okay.
and we make another push to publicize it.
Yes,
Yeah,
and get some information out there about the value and benefit of it. And the cost effectiveness of it vis-à-vis the truck.
It's an interesting question though about like just the whole town subsidizing something and only a portion partakes in, like our family actually does do the composting, but the one that always kind of, I think of for that example is like we've spent far more money on the nursery school, I think, in all the years I've been here. I've never even stepped foot in it, and I think far less than 25% of the town actually does. So it's kind of, it's maybe just one of those kind of, you know, price of doing business things. We have a fair amount of things we spend quite a bit of money on that don't really spread out to much of the taxpayers.
But they are also, I mean, I'm a strong advocate for the fact that the town makes available a pool inside the community where the residents get priority. We support the community center and the playground, which any child can play at, not just nursery school children. It's, you know, limited during school hours, but otherwise open as a park for our community. And it's a selling point for the community to have a preschool within walking distance and adjacent to the elementary school that the child is programmed to. It's a selling point in the community to have a pool within the community. Even though not every resident uses these amenities, we all benefit from the fact that it makes this an attractive, livable community, in my view.
I would agree. A lot of it, especially the like parks, that's just normal. It's, you know, you might get half the people use it, but, you know,
Well,
it's gotta be
especially
public fun.
any of these parks that are sort of in far-fledged parts of the community are not gonna be widely used. They're gonna be used by people in that neighborhood, just to be expected, right?
Yeah.
Just cost of doing business.
Right, and, you know, as a, like, in a very one-for-one transactional comparison, Stephen, even if your children didn't attend the preschool, if and when you were selling your house, it could be a selling point when you're selling your house, and you
I'm
could
not sure if it
benefit.
would be. I mean,
And
it really
you-
wasn't
and-
appealing to me when my kids were little, so.
But you might be selling your house to somebody who has a different perspective than you, and it
Yeah.
might be a selling point, and you might gain in terms of the value you're able to sell your house for.
We'll agree to disagree, but
I think the only other thing, and I'll just, we can take this down or leave it up since there's no resident watching, is just to get a sense of your capital budget funding priorities. Obviously, you don't have a full picture now, so you don't really know, you know, what
we have
what will be available for
Any money
transfer.
in the budget for capital programs of the field next to the pool?
Not
Everything.
not currently.
Okay, so that's something that I thought we wanted to potentially fund and plan to do earlier rather than later.
you started bringing up.
Regrade
be
it and
nice.
resod
Yeah.
it and, yeah.
Actually,
The dog park, look at doing something
Well-
with that whole area, right?
No, I wouldn't do the whole area. It's a recipe for delay if we try to do every element from the dog park, pool, ballpark, playground, wooded area. The ball field has, the ball field has the benefit of being probably one of the most used facilities and most evenly throughout the community. In other words, you have to go there, but I think it draws from all over the community for a wide variety of activities. And it would be a visible improvement that could be done relatively quickly. There's a lot of frustration in town about how long projects take, projects of all kinds. And some of them for good and sufficient reasons that are very hard to convey to the residents. But I think we owe them something that can be done relatively quickly. There are a range of things that can be done there. And I think we should aim to do those that could be done relatively quickly without compromising the ability to do more later. And that would essentially be regrading, amending the soil, removing the falling apart and largely disused backstop, and reseeding, and talking to someone about other things that could be done contemporaneously with that kind of work.
What kind of person?
a grounds and recreation type.
A designer,
Maybe, I don't want to get bogged down in semantics, but a designer sounds too much like someone.
Sounds like too broad.
For one, it's not really costly, sounds by the hour.
Yes, it does.
It's not expensive, but if it's perhaps too broad, but I would strongly recommend like the longer view. I very much share your thoughts on like, let's do something for the near term, but don't rule out things for the long term. And I think the long term, like a lot of other projects, we need to get like a real professional, have the real consultants to kind of do a lot of these things properly. I think a lot of that has caused a lot of our delay is we've had like this urge within town, and I've sensed it all the years I've been on council, it's just kind of, we'll do it all DIY, we'll kind of figure it out from here and get this idea that we're going to point and just, once you get a contractor to do these couple of things, and I think we ended up not really getting good results. So I would suggest, like, I think Chris, you and I talked about it before, like it's best to plant grass in the fall. So I think it's not realistic for us to get anything a longer term for this year to be designed and set up to plant for this fall. But perhaps that longer view would be kind of design it, whatever it might be agreed upon that is good, and then get that for like a fall 26 planning. But that shouldn't preclude, I wonder if, even though it's not ideal to put grass down in the spring, maybe just, get it leveled out and, sodded so it's really in good shape for the pool season this year through the fall, and kind of just let it ride out until it could be redone in 26, like in the fall of 26.
Okay, for purposes of this discussion, we want to determine priorities, broadly speaking, and I think I hear consensus that the ball field would be fairly high on that list of priorities. Then the next question is, to what degree we want to effectuate changes there beyond just reconditioning the surface.
Well, I've got a resident who asked me to read a statement, which I know Lisa got the same
Sure.
thing,
I
but
think I have the same thing.
probably Pat Maloney.
Yep, that's what I was just looking at, Phil.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read it just as he pointed, but he points to consider, it is
he's on the POSCO committee, for anybody who doesn't know who he is. He's got 4 kids in town, too.
I think.
So he has 5 votes.
So, it is understandable that the town would consider updating the field in Cambria Park, but the council should consider whether renovating the playing field in its current dimensions is the best use of funds, as well as whether the field refresh would better serve the community's needs by including some additional changes. Garrett Park is a close-knit community, and we have a number of organizations in the town dedicated to bringing our residents together on a regular basis. While the renovations to Town Hall will eventually provide indoor space for gatherings, the town currently lacks acceptable options for gathering outdoors. For example, there is no outdoor seating option for meals or food which could be of great use during the town's July 4th celebration and other events throughout the year, like Brewfest, Spooky Woods, Halloween, Egg Roll, and so forth. Additionally, none of the spaces currently issued or utilized for these occasions provide adequate accommodations for the handicapped and elderly attendees. Neither the park by Penn Place nor Cambria Field provides easy access for handicapped individuals. Because many events in the town are designed to include children and families with children, it is essential that we have at least one event space outdoor that can accommodate all. The field at Cambria Park offers one opportunity to add both covered seating and handicapped accessibility, and this location should be considered preferable to Penn Place for the following reasons. Parking spaces by Cambria Field allow elderly and handicapped individuals with easier access than those at Penn Station. Should the parking lot by the train station be used, residents seeking to use the handicapped accessibility would need to walk a distance that includes a significant slope at the end. Parking by Cambria Field, however, has no slope from the pool parking lot to the field. Cambria Park currently has a backstop for baseball, and kids by and large do not play baseball anymore. More kids are seeking a soccer field or lax flag football other than baseball. Any reworking of the field should recognize this fact and budget accordingly. There should be a fence, which he's kind of saying is wrong, but there should be a fence between the train track and the field. It may be possible to utilize some of the space to, it may be possible to utilize some of the area of the Cambria ball field to meet some other needs. Thanks to all city council members for giving time to serve.
Yeah, he's worried about the kids in the back. I guess there's no cohesive,
It's not
contiguous
continuous.
fence to separate the train tracks from the field. So wherever there's a gap, he wants it.
It's a huge
to be
gully
fenced
back
in.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a gully and the fence doesn't wrap around, it should go a little further.
So he was there and he said all those things. And I said, well, we should tell the town council because nobody's thinking about that.
And the multiple sports venue is an important thing to think about too, because even if it's a baseball field, that's fine in the spring, but seasons change and there's all kinds of activity, and soccer fields would also be very important.
Yeah, and kids play lacrosse and,
It could be very multi-purpose, and
Yeah.
that's what I've always kind of pitched when talking about it with residents, and you probably heard it from me in the last 2 years more times than you care to remember, but I hear a lot more excitement about that than I do about this building when I talk to people. So it's kind of interesting that my reaction might have been, well, if you want to have those kind of gatherings, you'll have this place fixed, and it has the backyard and the front yard, so it should, I would think, allay some of those concerns, but apparently some people feel otherwise. But the multi-purpose, I think, is the way to go. I think even that's not just a factor that people play baseball less and they play a lot of other sports more. Like that backstop was never really useful. I think if you're, when I was 10, I could have hit the ball all the way across the parking lot. So it's not realistic to play, beyond like age 8. So kids could kind of like fool around or play t-ball there, but they could play almost anything else. And I think it's important not just to think about kids. Like, I'm kind of inspired. I need to like do better at it. Like, I play soccer with a bunch of dads around town. I also play softball and volleyball, and we've grown into like so many different sports around here. But I have a friend in town who told me he started playing soccer when he was like 38, and he played until like 73. You could probably guess who this was. And that's the kind of thing I think I want to do. And when I've talked to a lot of other people around town, that's what they kind of crave, is like, instead of us like driving all the way out to the far edge of Rockville once a month to go play soccer on an indoor field, like we be able to go play there on like a sunny morning, and then the kids would be able to play, not just soccer, but a lot of other things. I think that's what generates that kind of greater interest than I kind of sense than there is for this property.
So for purposes of the sort of policy brainstorming on budget, I think the fundamental difference is, do we defer a decision pending a larger effort to find out what other or additional uses could be there, including whatever construction elements would be required? Because I think the import of that is, we're not talking about the FY26 budget. Or
Yeah,
if
it's
we
really
are,
27
it's just
entirely, yeah.
planning
Yeah, it could be like
and
the
not
planning.
execution.
Yeah, planning in 26 and execution in 27. And
Yeah.
I forgot to mention the other part of it too with that field is that I went over there to check measurements on it, is that willow oak that's out there. I assume that's a third rail topic, like it would have to stay versus being
I missed that. What?
the willow oak, the big tree that's out there
by
in
the
the field.
picnic table.
Yeah, I assume that would have to stay. But it's a willow oak, so it has a lot of exposed roots. But realistically, between the edge of the canopy of that, where you would be able to kind of run and play safely outside of that root zone, for two things, like you can't put a lot of dirt on it, and you don't want to be tripping over roots. from there over to the fence, it's only about 60 feet, which is really not, it's not realistic except for like a 5-6-year-old kind of soccer game to play. It's just not enough width. So I think it leads to a question like it needs that like bigger holistic planning to kind of say, hey, if we're, you know, if the tree is a constraint, then what do we do to make like a, you know, more useful width for the next 50 years to be able to play on that field, which I think you and I discussed it, might mean like taking some of the goalie space. Like we own another 35 feet beyond that fence, but that's not cheap to do it, but it may be worthwhile in the grand scheme of things. The other option might be, maybe we'd be surprised and the willow oak could be replaced by 4 or 5 other trees that would be good for 100 years. Like I was pleasantly surprised that the trees were gonna be replaced at Waverly. I just assumed we'd always do spare no expense to work around like those trees that were sliding down the hill, but so I don't know. I suspect that the answer would be we have to work around the willow oak, but that adds complication. But and there's a lot of potential to this. Like I used to do this stuff for years, and it, you know, just doing the field doesn't preclude doing something. I personally don't think I'd want or need a pavilion, but there's enough space to kind of do both if it turned out that that's what the, you know, the larger community really wants. I've only heard about to do a pavilion, but I've only heard 2 households in this town interested, and one was the Maloney's. But that's what I was suggesting last year with the budget, was to get kind of like what we did with Norton Land Design, get a professional to come in, survey it, draw up different options, so we can have like a big, anybody wants to opine on it can comment and talk about it. So otherwise, I think we just kick all these decisions down the road. We never really do anything.
The members of POSCO would be very supportive of that idea.
Yeah,
Do you think so, Phil?
Yeah, definitely.
like doing a
A
full.
larger design of the area before we
Right.
start moving dirt
Does
around.
the Parks and Open Space Committee generate minutes that are made
Yes.
available?
Yes.
They do, okay.
How do
Yeah,
we
I
get
have
those?
minutes for
Are they
the
posted on
meeting.
the website that we can look them up?
When we have received them. we
Yeah,
have
I just
posted them.
received one.
There's been a bit of a schedule syncing issue between kind of getting their minutes and getting them on board. As POSCO settles into a more consistent meeting routine, I am expecting that to smooth out.
Yeah, I can forward their draft minutes, but the one that I just received from
Yeah,
last
yeah.
week's meeting, I'll
Is
forward
there a way
that
we
to
can just
everybody.
get all of the, like the council can just get all of the committee's meetings?
Sure.
Or committee's minutes
Yep.
regularly? I was a person who
If
was
I had my
chastised
way,
personally.
if I had
on
my
that.
way, the town would hire Sean Conlon for
Oh
a
my
short-term contract to teach each of the committees how to do minutes.
Yeah,
The Arboretum Committee meeting minutes are a joy to behold, and they're very well done, very easily parsed.
It's a well-honed skill.
Well, and when POSCO formed, I gave them the Arboretum Committee minutes as a template because
Yeah.
they're great.
I think Nancy Walls and I looked at that for HBC
It's a
too,
little-
because
yeah.
that was a bit of a chore trying to get going with minutes.
I
And
will-
we got chastised for not having them, so.
The chastisement came from me, I admit it.
I'd just like to register a time check. It is 9:30.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Okay, do we want to try to identify any additional capital projects that we should look more carefully at for the next meeting?
I mean, the town hall is
Well, that's-
absorbing a lot of the resources.
Yeah.
If we do the town hall and then we do something in Cambria, doesn't that absorb pretty much all of the capital
Likely.
planning budget that we might ever conceive of?
Pretty much.
yep.
Yeah.
So makes our job easier.
Yeah.
Focused, targeted.
But they're implicit, you're, in articulating it that way, we're making some implicit judgments about
True.
the
Trade-offs.
lesser priority of other things.
Yes, that is true, but
And
Seems
which
like
is
we
fine.
we already
I'm not-
did
I'm not
that.
saying, we just need to recognize.
we've done that for the last period of time, I think, with the town hall. I mean, I think that's already investment that we've sort of agreed to,
Yeah,
and so we don't have a lot of wiggle room this year.
And what was
Is
our
that
total we
true?
have in there now?
For-
For town hall? recall what we have? I didn't
Well,
didn't
like
get
I
a chance
say,
to add it
just
up.
as a reminder, the 300,000 is being backed out just due to timing, but with that, it's roughly $2 million.
Roughly two, okay.
Yeah.
So we may need a little bit more than that realistically to get there on
Well,
scheme
keep
5.
in mind that the first thing we did was
Oh, you just added, yeah.
increase the prior year carryover to
Yeah.
nearly $270,000.
If I can just jump back to Cambria, are we, just to make sure I'm clear on everyone's direction, are we now talking about this, I think, Stephen, you referred to it as a schematic design last
Yeah,
year. Is
yeah.
that what we're talking about doing, where there'd be concept plans for different?
That's what I would suggest, and maybe like do one where there's, working kind of, well, get figure out the scope,
Yeah.
but, you know, kind of different variations, like we did on town hall. Or
Right.
At least we intended on town hall. This one should have been stretched a little bit more than what it was. We ended up with a lot of options, just because it's not good the way this town does this, but a lot of options that were pretty close together that really stretch imagination. I think we could right the ship and do it right on Cambria Park.
Yeah, so just as a reminder, when you all talked about this last year, you did put some kind of seed funding for that in the budget, roughly about 50% of what Stephen estimated it would cost.
Yeah, I think
So there
I
is some
asked
funding
for
for
60,
that.
and then it was requested to take it to 0, and I think we brought it back to.
Yeah, right now in that account, I think we put it in capital planning other. There was a little bit of residual funding from something I can't recall, but there's currently $32,857 in that account.
And I mean, just to, I think, state that if we make a big deal about planning, I mean, understanding that planning is for long-term projects important, but if we just execute something this year as a starter towards, as a foot holding towards doing that work, that might also give new functionality to that area and also sort of lay claim to a bigger project later. And it might, I mean, I feel like if we just do another planning process, that will take multiple years. And we'll be here in a year or two
No, this takes.
having the same
like-
conversation.
No, like Yandell Park, it only took, what, a month for him to put those concepts together, right, or a month or two?
A little longer, but
And it's a
not- yeah.
lot less than like this building, which Wiedemann's gonna did it a couple months to do his other ones. Yeah, it's really only a month or two.
Well, it's only a
before-
month or two, except that we also talked about it last year and we didn't do anything, right?
Yeah, I was supposed to do
So-
anything last year, but I think that's changed.
And the other thing is you're gonna have to get community input, so I mean, yes, you could come up with one thing, but then you'll need community input. The other thing I was thinking of is that at the end of the day, it all kind of comes down to a flat, well-drained field. I mean, if we do nothing more than make a flat, well-drained field, that would,
It's not quite, the part of the problem is it is kind of flat, so it needs more grounding in it, and then
Okay.
the other thing is it doesn't have enough sand in it, so it's like very clayey, so it takes over a week to dry with even like a modicum of rain, and then the problem with that is if you get that's why the county always closes their fields when it rains, like if you run around on a field that's soggy, all your footprints, they all get stuck, and then when it's clay soil and it dries out, then you get all this lumpy, so it just gets worse and worse and worse, and that's kind of what we're up against. That's what, like Chris was saying, we'd have to amend the soil to kind of, and that's where I think we need to do things differently, and, you know, that kind of thing, not just say, hey, let's hire a landscape contractor to bring in a couple, you know, truckloads of dirt, but we need to, you know, get somebody that knows the turf maintenance and stuff, so we can get a field that's actually gonna stay, like, and probably do a realistic outsourced maintenance of that kind of thing. It's more than just mowing, and, you know, to get a field that doesn't go back to what,
And making
What
a
you've got.
decision about that willow tree is gonna be that's a big decision to take it out or keep it.
yeah, I'm sure there's some residents who would probably like to hang me from it
A
just
lot
for
of
talking
shade
about it.
for
so-
events.
It might help you to make that decision if you go at high noon in the middle of July. On a
Agreed.
sunny day. See what it's contributing in the way of shade.
Yeah,
it's either that or
That's
else
what you'd be missing.
you'll need that pavilion.
and you assume,
Which
I
I
assume
would
you gotta
vote
work around it, and there are ways to work around it, but
No, you don't have to, you can take it out, it's just that there are consequences of doing
Right.
Yeah, but one of the potential upsides if you
beyond
do keep.
creating more
Yeah,
space.
but the potential upside if you do create more spaces, you know, the field most likely would be a rectangular thing to be multi-purpose. If it's all beyond that willow tree, then you've got all the space that's next to the willow tree on the left and the right that could be for other things. Maybe it's smaller kids to play, maybe it's whatever, your outdoor yoga, and who knows what could be there. It wouldn't have to be just a field if you,
So,
If
so
you do it the
if
other
we
way.
have 30,000 in the fund to plan for this, and it seems like it might cost double that to really execute the plan?
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
that'd be
if
that'd be
you
a lot
were
more.
envisioning it, how much would it cost
oh, it'd be over $200,000, I think, to really do it,
to
right?
do the whole thing?
Yeah.
How about the planning stage?
60
I think
is
we-
what, I
we
think you
were
said, you
guessing
gave me
maybe like
60, I
60-ish.
think, yeah.
So we need
And that might
another
be
30?
30.
That was probably cautious last year, so.
Looks like we have 10 in there now of unexpended capital funds as of January 2025 in the
Yeah,
mid-year.
we booked, the preliminary funding that you gave is booked in 32.6, which is capital planning other, and it has $32,857.
Oh, okay, so it's not public spaces, other public spaces.
Yeah, I did have, you know, and well, obviously the state is wrestling with a huge, you know, budget deficit, so we'll have to see kind of what happens to the funding programs. But last year I did have a discussion with our contact for, at DNR, who does the community parks and playground, because I was somewhat tying into to Yendel. So there's not a prohibition that you have to finish your state grant-funded project to apply for another, but certainly they'd like to see that you can get something done. They don't typically tend to pay for studies, but, you know, to your point about the implementation, Stephen, like I say, we'll have to see how the program survives this year. But there is a possibility of applying for grants, if there's a plan to, I mean, that's what they do, it's parks and playgrounds. So that's a possible funding source for
How long would
transportation.
it take, though, to apply for it and know if you get it and then get it?
Well, I mean, we obviously need to have something that's sort of based, you know, here's the plan and here's what it would be. And like I say, I know sometimes when the state has had financial problems, Chris and I were talking about when he was mayor in the late 2000s, some of these programs are the ones that kind of get the axe.
Right.
Yeah,
Typically you apply in August, so we would miss this cycle because we don't have anything.
Well, it's only March.
Well, I think the issue is,
February.
they're not going to pay for a study, and so
No,
you
and I
want
wonder
to
if we
see.
could put a pin in it anyway, just like get through the study, and, because it's gonna take a long time to do
Right.
community input here, and.
Right, but you just look ahead to
yeah.
something that might be a funding
I think
source.
hold that goal of kind of like, set the stage where it could be kind of like designed next summer and then built next fall, not this coming fall, but
Yeah.
the next fall, so we can kind of work backward from that. But I'd also like to, I would suggest personally, like sticking a pin in the idea of outside funding, because it could come.
It can take some-
Could come with requirements from them, and I think until we know kind of what it is
Yeah.
and, you know, what everybody kind of wants, or, you know, it might be good to like not have any state requirements hanging on it.
Yeah.
So,
Just saying, if you're looking at $200,000 in the grand scheme, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
But I think I'm hearing different things. So some people seem to want to kind of invest in something and have something in FY 2026, and then there's this broader discussion about looking at it more holistically, so.
well, FY 2026 is what, it's from this July to next July, right? So
yeah,
we'd have to,
June.
doesn't that work though, where we could have planning and maybe if we do a temporary, if we all agree to do a temporary for this year, kind of reseeding and, you know, just sprucing it up.
Is that what everyone's?
Could those go into FY 26, and then wouldn't the
Sure.
execution be in FY 27 then? That wasn't that your point
Yeah, I'm
earlier?
kind of hearing Chris and Todd want to do something in FY 2026 to improve conditions.
Yeah, I would too.
I just think
I
that,
want to make sure I'm hearing you all correctly.
I mean, we talked about this last year, we didn't get it underway. And I just fear that may continue to happen
If you don't
with very good intentions to do something systematic and ambitious, but that, you know, those things don't always happen. That's my experience in my short time on this council.
Yeah, I think it's the town dynamics can be tough, but I think this time we can move through it. It seems like there's not roadblocks like there were in the past, so.
That we know of.
I mean, were there roadblocks in the past, or did we just not? I think we just ran out of broad, bandwidth. I mean, the town hall is what absorbed all of our
I don't
bandwidth.
know, it's hard for me to relate, like I deal with 100 projects concurrently at work, so like, this is like small potatoes, this kind of stuff, but, in the town, it's like, it would take me far too long for me to describe it. The town does things different than anywhere else.
I'm going to
really
suggest
experienced, so.
something to just break the logjam here. For the next iteration of a proposal for FY '26 budget, we have sufficient funds to do planning, and we can just decide at the next meeting whether we want over and above that for some actual work there in FY '26, or just the planning.
Okay.
Okay.
So just
Let
hold
me-
on that.
Let me, and, just note to ourselves, in any project in this town, we've got to also talk to maintenance people first. If we complete the fence at the back of the ball field, because there's an existing 10 or 12 foot high fence.
That's 12, yeah.
There's only one small gap in it that I just heard we want to close. We have to make sure that the adjacent homeowner is willing to extend their fence to meet that. And the maintenance people have to have some alternative to what they do now, which is go diagonally across the field and dump
Yeah.
into the ravine at that one little gap.
Our Bugle reporter,
Yeah,
the main
maybe
Bugle
they
reporter
should,
does it
maybe
too.
they shouldn't, but they need to be consulted in
Yeah.
almost anything we do in
Yeah.
town, because they tend to not be often. Anyway, so just to get us off dead center
got it.
on that issue, is there any other issue from which the staff needs guidance at this point?
No,
Okay.
I think we're in pretty good shape.
I do have one more thing to throw into the parks, and that is, at some point, and maybe the staff can look at this, but at some point, we need to look at replacing the playground equipment over at the community center.
I have had some discussions with them, and let me see if I have it handy. We had talked last year, it's not funded, but it was sort of in the kind of longer term. I think the thinking was that we would basically take responsibility in terms of just the planning and acquisition, and then the nursery school by the MOU as it stands today would pay 50% of that. Probably a modest playground, I know this probably is gonna make everyone cringe, but probably is about 75 grand.
Right.
I had some discussions with their treasurer within the last year. What we were trying to do, and I need to kind of rattle his cage a little bit, playground specialists had offered just to put together some options that they could look at, and they wanted to start a fundraising campaign. The other thing I had talked to them about, once again, I think the state's financial situation is a little different, but it would also be a project that could be ripe for community parks and playground if the program's funded. So we're a couple of years out from that, but the equipment's definitely, you're right, Phil, it's within the next 5 years
Okay.
that it should be replaced.
Okay, anything further?
Just a general question, I wonder if like all of us, maybe between this meeting and the next, I wonder if there are any spots where there's like money hanging around in the capital budget that just kind of hangs there for a long time, that we shouldn't look at reassigning it, so.
Yeah,
Just a general
what
thought.
I would suggest is, and we don't need to do it right now, but that was part of the reason why I was trying to show you where the funding was. So if you look at the January report, certainly I think we need to have an eye towards, and which is the opposite of what you're asking, Stephen, but sort of keeping in mind the future road work that's going to have to be done and have
The
to be.
800,000 and we only have 400.
Right, and we got a couple years, and we'll have some highway user. I think the things that would, and you all can kind of look at this at your leisure. We had included, because this was kind of one of your strategic planning goals at one time, may not be now. We had $75,000 in capital planning for stormwater management. This, I'm not suggesting you should do this, I'm just saying that's probably one area you could look
We've done
at.
nothing for stormwater management.
It was actually to sort of kind of do an assessment of what the problems are in the community. I was talking to the village manager town manager for, say, Chevy Chase View, and they had done this. What she relayed to me is it really has to be structured very well, because she said they got a lot of issues in terms of kind of private property to private property issues, and what we would be talking about were issues that are stemming from publicly owned infrastructure. So whether or not you feel there's value in that, I don't know.
Well, if we're gonna get started on stormwater management, that would be the first step.
That was sort of the thinking at the time you all
Isn't there
talked
money
about it.
allocated for that? Didn't we have?
We do,
study?
we have, truthfully, it's been a tough year to get something going, but we have 75,000 there.
Yeah, so that should be a start for that, right?
Right,
They haven't even interviewed companies.
right, we haven't,
I strongly suggest we do nothing.
right now,
Yes.
like, but that's why it's a little dicey right now.
Give anyone an argument, we consider it's our responsibility.
I wonder if even if it's
Right.
better to just have that out of the line.
Short term, just,
It was phrased very carefully, because I had actually, you know, put it this way, there was some guidance in terms of how to even put that in a public forum.
Yeah.
Because of the issues, but I would encourage you all just to sort of look at where there's unexpended capital funds. It was in your January report, and it's in your agenda packet, and that might stimulate some ideas that you all have.
In the packet from today?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's the very last page of the budget development one.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
all right, stand adjourned.
And adjourn.
Yay.